The crystal wine glasses caught the light from the chandelier as I carefully placed them around the mahogany dining table. 24 years of hosting Christmas dinner in this house, and I still felt that familiar flutter of anticipation mixed with anxiety. Everything had to be perfect. It always did. I smoothed my burgundy dress, the one my late husband Robert had complimented every Christmas for 15 years, and stepped back to admire the table. The gold charger plates gleamed. The centerpiece of winter roses and pine looked magazine-worthy, and the silverware was positioned with military precision. In the kitchen, the crown roast was resting, the Yorkshire pudding had risen beautifully, and the Christmas pudding was warming in the steamer. "Margaret," my son David's voice carried through the foyer. "We're here." I checked my reflection one last time in the hallway mirror, patting my silver hair into place. At 68, I wasn't the beauty I once was, but I still carried myself with dignity. Robert used to say I had the kind of grace that couldn't be bought or taught. David appeared first, tall and handsome like his father, but lacking Robert's warmth. Behind him came Stephanie, my daughter-in-law of 3 years, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled, her designer dress probably costing more than most people's monthly salary. She was beautiful. I'd give her that. But there was something calculating in her ice blue eyes that had always made me uncomfortable. "Hi, Mom." David pecked my cheek perfunctorily. "The house looks great, as always." "Thank you, darling." I turned to Stephanie with a genuine smile. "Stephanie, you look lovely. How was the drive from the city?" "Long," she replied curtly, not bothering to remove her designer sunglasses despite being indoors. "The traffic was absolutely dreadful. I told David we should have stayed at the Ritz-Carlton instead of making this trip." I felt the familiar sting but kept my smile fixed. "Well, I'm glad you made it. Dinner will be ready in about an hour. Would you like some mulled wine? I made it with your favorite spices." Stephanie finally removed her sunglasses, fixing me with that cold stare I'd come to dread. "I don't drink your homemade concoctions, Margaret. They're usually too sweet and unsophisticated for my palate." David shifted uncomfortably. "Steph, Mom's mulled wine is actually really good." "David, darling, you have such simple tastes," Stephanie interrupted, her tone syrupy but her eyes sharp. "It's one of the things I'm working on improving about you." I excused myself to the kitchen, my hands trembling slightly as I basted the roast. 3 years of this. 3 years of subtle insults, backhanded compliments, and watching my son become smaller and smaller under his wife's influence. But today was Christmas. I would not let her ruin it. My sister Ellen arrived next with her husband Frank, followed by David's cousin James and his partner Michael. Soon, the house was filled with laughter and conversation, the way it used to be when Robert was alive. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel hopeful. Maybe this year would be different. I was wrong. Dinner started pleasantly enough. The roast was perfectly pink. The vegetables were cooked to perfection, and even Stephanie seemed to be enjoying herself, holding court with stories about her latest interior design projects. She worked for a high-end firm in Manhattan, something she never let anyone forget. "This roast is incredible, Aunt Margaret," James said, raising his wine glass. "You've outdone yourself again." "Thank you, dear. It's the same recipe I've used for years. Robert always said it was his favorite." "Yes. Well, Robert had very basic tastes," Stephanie said with a little laugh. "No offense, Margaret, but this whole meal is rather traditional, isn't it? These days, most people are doing fusion Christmas dinners, Asian-inspired glazes, molecular gastronomy elements. This feels like something from the 1950s. The table fell silent. Ellen shot me a warning look, her dark eyes flashing dangerously. She'd never liked Stephanie, not from the first moment David had brought her home. "I think tradition is wonderful," Michael said diplomatically. There's something comforting about knowing some things stay the same. Comfort food for comfortable people, Stephanie replied with another of her cold smiles. I suppose not everyone can appreciate culinary innovation. I gripped my napkin under the table. Well, I've always believed that food prepared with love tastes better than anything else. How quaint, Stephanie said, taking a sip of the expensive wine she'd brought, pointedly not touching the wine I'd selected. Love doesn't really substitute for skill, though, does it? David reached over and squeezed my hand. Mom's an amazing cook, Steph. Always has been. Oh, David, you're so sweet to your mother. But honestly, darling, your palate has been shaped by years of, well, let's call it comfort food. You don't really know what fine dining is supposed to taste like. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. 24 years of Christmas dinners, countless family gatherings, the meals I'd lovingly prepared through David's childhood, his teenage years, his college breaks, all dismissed as comfort food by this woman who'd been in his life for 3 years. Stephanie, Ellen said, her voice carrying a warning tone. Perhaps we could change the subject? Oh, I'm sorry. Was I being rude? Stephanie's eyes were wide with mock innocence. I just think it's important to be honest. Margaret works so hard on these meals and they're adequate for what they are. Adequate. The word hit me like a physical blow. I thought of all the hours I'd spent in the kitchen today, the careful preparation, the love I'd poured into every dish. Adequate. I think we should talk about something else, David said quietly, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. He was torn between defending his mother and keeping peace with his wife. Actually, no, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. If Stephanie has something to say, I'd like to hear it. Stephanie's smile widened. She'd been waiting for this opening. Well, since you asked, I just think it's time someone was honest with you, Margaret, about a lot of things. The room was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. You see, the problem isn't just the cooking, it's this whole setup you have here. This desperate need to be the center of attention, to make everyone gather around your table and pretend that your little domestic performances matter. It's honestly quite sad. Ellen started to stand up, her face flushed with anger, but I held up a hand to stop her. Go on, I said quietly. You cling to David like he's still a little boy. All this and my dear son this and my darling that. It's suffocating. And these elaborate holiday productions. Do you really think anyone wants to spend their Christmas in this dusty old house, eating the same boring food year after year? My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice level. This house has been in our family for 40 years. It's where David grew up. Exactly. Stephanie clapped her hands together like she'd made a brilliant point. It's a museum, Margaret, a shrine to your dead husband and your past glory. David's told me how you guilt him into coming here, how you make him feel responsible for your loneliness. Stephanie, that's enough, David said, but his voice was weak. No, David. She needs to hear this. We all need some honesty here. Stephanie turned back to me, her beautiful face twisted with something ugly. The truth is, Margaret, you're a relic. A leftover from a time when women had no identity beyond their husbands and their kitchens. You never had a career, never accomplished anything significant. You've spent the last 8 years since Robert died trying to make David fill the void, and frankly, it's pathetic. The words hung in the air like poison. I felt something inside me crack. A dam that had been holding back years of slights, years of watching this woman systematically destroy my relationship with my son. And the most honest thing I can tell you, Stephanie continued, warming to her theme now, is that you're the most useless woman I've ever met. You contribute nothing to society, nothing to your family beyond these little domestic theatrics. You're a burden that David's too kind to acknowledge. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the shock on everyone's faces, the way they were all frozen in their seats. David's face was white, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I stood up slowly, my napkin falling to the floor. I looked around the table at these people I loved, at the home I'd created, at the life I'd built with my husband and sustained after his death. Then I looked at Stephanie, sitting there, with that satisfied smirk on her perfect face, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, pure, crystalline rage. "Well," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the dining room, "since we're being honest today, let me tell you what I think of you, Stephanie." Her smirk faltered slightly. "I think you're a sad, empty person who married my son not for love, but because you saw him as a project. A nice, malleable man with a good income who would give you the life you thought you deserved. I think you've spent 3 years systematically isolating him from his family because you can't stand the idea that anyone else might have a claim on his affection." Stephanie's face was no longer smirking. "How dare you?" "Oh, I'm not finished," I continued, feeling the power of 45 years of marriage, of raising a child, of building a life and home flow through me. "You want to call me useless? Let me tell you about useful, dear. I spent 45 years building something with a man I loved. I raised a son who was kind and generous before you got your claws into him. I've maintained this home, this family, these traditions not because I'm clinging to the past, but because I understand that some things are worth preserving." I moved to the sideboard where I kept Robert's photo and picked it up. "This man loved me for 37 years. He respected me, cherished me, and never once made me feel like I needed to apologize for who I was. He built this life with me, and when he died, I didn't just curl up and disappear. I kept going. I kept loving. I kept creating beauty and warmth, and yes, comfort, for the people I care about." Stephanie's mouth was hanging open slightly. "You say I never had a career? You're right. I chose to build something different. I chose to create a home so beautiful and loving that my son would want to bring his friends here, that my neighbors would feel welcome, that family gatherings would be something people looked forward to instead of endured. I chose to master the art of making people feel loved and valued through food, through hospitality, through creating spaces where souls could rest." I set the photo down gently and turned back to face her. "You, on the other hand, have spent 3 years trying to diminish everyone around you to make yourself feel bigger. You've turned my generous, loving son into a man who's afraid to hug his own mother. You've poisoned every family gathering with your superiority and disdain. And now you have the audacity to call me useless." The room was absolutely silent except for the sound of my own breathing. "Let me tell you what's useless, Stephanie. Useless is a woman who can't appreciate the love freely given to her. Useless is someone who looks at a table set with care and sees only an opportunity to tear someone down. Useless is a person so insecure in her own worth that she has to destroy others to feel valuable." I walked slowly around the table until I was standing directly behind her. "Chair. And the most useless thing of all? A woman who doesn't understand that strength isn't about tearing others down. It's about building them up. Something you've never learned to do." Stephanie twisted in her chair to look at me, her face flushed red. "You bitter old—" "I'm not finished," I said sharply, and something in my tone made her snap her mouth shut. "Since you brought up honesty, let me share something that might interest everyone. Did you all know that Stephanie has been having lunch with David's business partner Derek every Tuesday for the past 6 months?" David's head snapped up. "What?" "Oh yes, darling. Your wife has been meeting Derek at that little French restaurant downtown. The one she told you was too expensive when you suggested it for your anniversary." Stephanie's face went white. That's. We were discussing business opportunities. Business opportunities? I raised an eyebrow. Is that what they're calling it now? Because according to Margaret Fletcher, you remember Margaret? She works at the restaurant. You two seem very intimate for business partners. Holding hands across the table, sharing dessert, leaving together. The silence was thunderous. David was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. How do you know Margaret Fletcher? Stephanie whispered. Because, my dear, unlike you, I talk to people. I listen to them. I care about their lives. Margaret's daughter Amy was in David's class in high school. We've stayed in touch over the years. She mentioned seeing you there because she knows you're married to David, and she was concerned. David pushed back from the table, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. Stephanie, is this true? David, I can explain. Is it true? His voice was deadly quiet. Stephanie looked around the table wildly, seeking an ally, but found only hostile faces staring back at her. It's not what you think. You know what I think? David stood up, his napkin falling to the floor. I think my mother just saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. He walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered garden. I think I've been living with a stranger for 3 years. I think I've let that stranger convince me that my mother, the woman who raised me, who loved me unconditionally, who has never asked for anything but a little respect, was somehow the problem in our relationship. He turned back to face Stephanie, and I saw Robert's strength in his posture, Robert's integrity in his eyes. Get out, he said simply. David, please, let me explain. Get out of my mother's house. Get your things from our apartment. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce. Stephanie stood up so quickly her chair fell backward. You can't be serious. Over some bitter old woman's lies? Those lies explain a lot, David said coldly. Like why you've been so eager to keep me away from my family. Like why you always have late meetings on Tuesdays. Like why you've been so cruel to the most loving woman I know. He walked over to me and put his arms around me, and for the first time in 3 years, it felt like I had my son back. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered into my hair. I'm so sorry I let her treat you this way. Stephanie was gathering her purse and coat with sharp, violent movements. This is insane. You're all insane. David, you're throwing away your marriage based on gossip and the manipulation of a jealous old woman who can't let go of her precious son. No, David said quietly, not releasing me from his embrace. I'm saving what's left of my soul. Stephanie stopped at the dining room doorway and turned back one last time. Her beautiful face was twisted with rage and humiliation. You think you've won, Margaret? You've just guaranteed that your son will never find happiness. What woman would want to marry into this? This pathetic little shrine to your past? You've poisoned him against love. I stepped out of David's embrace and walked to face her one last time. I haven't poisoned him against love, Stephanie. I've reminded him what love actually looks like. Real love doesn't require you to diminish yourself or abandon the people who raised you. Real love doesn't demand that you choose sides. And real love certainly doesn't involve secret lunches with other people. I moved closer until I was looking directly into her eyes. You want to know what I've guaranteed? I've guaranteed that my son will never again settle for someone who thinks love is a competition to be won rather than a gift to be shared. I've guaranteed that he'll remember his worth. And I've guaranteed that no one will ever again call me useless in my own home. Stephanie's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the small, angry person underneath. We'll see about that, she hissed and stormed out. We heard the front door slam, then the sound of her car starting and driving away. The silence that followed was different from before. It felt cleansing, like the air after a thunderstorm. Ellen was the first to speak. Well, she said, raising her wine glass, That was the best Christmas dinner theater I've ever seen. The tension broke, and suddenly everyone was talking at once. James was praising my steel backbone. Michael was asking how long I'd known about the affair. Frank was shaking his head and muttering about young people today. But I only had eyes for David, who was standing by the window again, looking lost. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "are you all right?" He turned to me with tears in his eyes. "I feel like I've been asleep for 3 years, like I was living someone else's life." "You were being controlled by someone who was very good at manipulation," I said, taking his hands. "It's not your fault." "But it is," he said fiercely. "I let her isolate me from you, from Ellen, from everyone who really loved me. I actually started to believe that you were the problem, that your love was somehow too much." He squeezed my hands tighter. "When did I become the kind of man who would let someone talk to his mother that way? Dad would be ashamed of me. Your father would be proud of you for recognizing the truth when you heard it," I said firmly, "and for having the courage to act on it." Over the next hour, the rest of the family gradually left, each hugging me extra tight, each whispering words of support and admiration. Ellen was the last to go. "I am so proud of you," she said, holding me close. "I've wanted to tell that little witch off for years." "I know you have," I laughed. "But it needed to come from me." After everyone was gone, David and I sat in the living room by the fire, sharing a bottle of Robert's best scotch and talking until nearly dawn. He told me about the slow erosion of his confidence, the way Stephanie had made him question every relationship, every tradition, every part of himself that didn't fit her vision. I told him about the years of small hurts, the loneliness, the fear that I was losing him forever. "I missed you so much," I whispered as he held me close on the sofa. "I missed my son. I'm here now, Mom, and I'm not going anywhere." 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. Stephanie had tried to contest it, claiming David was having a mental breakdown, but the evidence of her affair was overwhelming. She got half the apartment and a modest settlement. David moved back home with me. Temporarily, he insisted, though I secretly hoped he'd stay as long as he wanted. The house felt alive again. David was himself again, the kind, thoughtful man Robert and I had raised. He started dating again eventually, but this time he brought his girlfriends to meet me early, and he trusted my judgment when I told him what I thought. "I want someone who loves you too," he told me one day as we worked in the garden together. "I want someone who sees this family as something to join, not something to compete with." 6 months after that terrible Christmas dinner, he brought home Sarah, a teacher with laughing eyes and gentle hands who exclaimed over my photo albums and asked for my Yorkshire pudding recipe. She understood that loving David meant loving his history, his family, his traditions, and that there was room for everyone at the table. The next Christmas, Sarah helped me cook dinner. As we worked side by side in the kitchen, I watched her carefully season the roast and arrange the vegetables with the same care I would have taken. "Thank you for accepting me," she said quietly as she rolled out pastry for the mince pies. "Thank you for loving him properly," I replied. That evening, as we all sat around the same mahogany table, now expanded to accommodate Sarah's parents as well, I looked around at the faces illuminated by candlelight and felt Robert's presence as surely as if he were sitting beside me. David raised his glass for a toast. "To my mother," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who taught me that love isn't about making yourself smaller to fit someone else's vision. It's about finding people who celebrate who you are and want to build something beautiful together." Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt tears prick my eyes. "And to the most useful woman I know," David continued, looking directly at me, "who saved me from forgetting what love actually looks like." As I looked around that table, at my son and his wonderful new love, at my sister and her husband, At the new traditions we were building while honoring the old, I realized that sometimes the best gift you can give someone isn't comfort or kindness. Sometimes it's truth, served up with a side of righteous fury and a healthy dose of dignity. And sometimes, the most useful thing you can do is remind people that love shouldn't require you to disappear. I raised my own glass and smiled. To family, I said simply, to the ones we're born with, and the ones we choose. To family, they echoed, and the crystal caught the candlelight like stars. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside, we were warm.